Hi, everyone. My name is Kat, and I am the guest curator for this year's Being Seen group show, which I've titled Uncommon Threads. And today I am conducting an informal Zoom studio visit with somebody whose work I greatly admire, and someone whom I consider a bit of an art mentor for me, Catherine Hurd. All right. Hi, Catherine. So, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Catherine Hurd. I have been an artist for several decades. I began my practice in the early 1990s. I lived in Toronto from the time I graduated OCAD until just before the pandemic, when I moved to Windsor to take a job as an assistant professor of visual art at the University of Windsor.
Anything else about yourself that's not related to, that's not related to your career?
Okay. Um, I'm a person who collects a lot of things, and my collections often tie into the art that I make. I am very interested in things like gardening and textiles, and the other, I guess, hobby I have is my Shiba Inu, Oscar, who is my studio mate and who is also a therapy dog. So he often comes to the university with me to hang out with the students.
Mhm.
Hopefully he won't do any barking today because he is just down there at my feet.
Oh, wonderful. Well, maybe at the end we can like say hi to him. Some people invite their friends and little studio soulmates to say hi. It's started to be a tradition. So, could you briefly show us your studio or describe where you work?
Okay. Well, this year I've been doing a lot of my work at the university because I have a number of students who are helping me with this piece. It's a very large, very labor-intensive piece. So I have some students who are assisting with assembly, but it's also a community-oriented piece. So this is a piece that invites people from all across Canada and particularly the local areas around me to contribute to the piece. So in fact, at the university this term, we're doing sewing circles every Friday between 1 and 3 for the rest of the term, and we'll be continuing that hopefully throughout the summer, but definitely picking up again in September.
I know that like you've done a lot of textiles throughout your life. So where do you normally work on textiles?
Well, since I've been living in Windsor, I don't have a studio in my home, which is normally what I do. Well, I guess I do, but it's a very small bedroom, so it's not my usual studio space. So I'm a little bit of a transitional phase right now. Right now, we are actually working on renovating the house, and the attic is going to become my studio, and it's got 4 beautiful skylights in it. So I'm really looking forward to that. And in the interim, I'm kind of bouncing around to different spaces in the university and then sometimes using my small bedroom space.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, you've already started a little bit with like describing your piece in the show, but first, could you provide like a brief visual description for folks who might not be able to experience your piece visually?
Of course. Yes, this is a piece that is made of antique quilts that have been cut apart and reassembled with pieces, patches that we have made to imitate the style of the original quilt, but that look different, or that they're, I guess, camouflaged into this patchwork of images. The images are embroidered with red thread on a white background. And the color of the white background shifts between a pure white to some that are quite dingy looking. and sometimes actually have stains on them because I am using completely antique fabrics in this piece. The imagery varies between some images that are very traditional, so things like floral embroideries or embroideries of barnyard scenes or domestic items like pots and pans. And some of the images are patriotic, particularly American patriotic. This was a very popular style of quilt in the Americas. And some of the images, the ones that we have embroidered, myself and the participants in the piece, are images of politics. Everything from the Abu Ghraib prison to Hiroshima to scenes of World War I to what is happening in the Ukraine right now.
Yeah, all right. I don't think we've mentioned the title yet of your piece. Could you tell us a little bit about the title and its meaning?
Yes, the title is called Red Work, the Emperor of Atlantis. So red work is the style of embroidery. It originated in the mid-1800s when the first color-fast red threads were developed. And the Emperor of Atlantis is the name of an opera. It's in German, it's known as Der Kaiser von Atlantis. Sometimes it's also called Death's Refusal. And it was written and originally was going to first be performed in the concentration camp of Theresienstadt. The librettist and the composer were both sent to Auschwitz, and the score was kept hidden by the camp librarian. The piece was first performed in the 1970s. And the opera tells the story of death looking at what man has wrought and essentially saying, "You're doing my job for me, I quit." So the opera opens with a prisoner that refuses to die, and the story unrolls from there. But the reason that that story really spoke to me was because I think really since I was quite young, I felt this overwhelming sense of helplessness as an individual to change the things that I see happening in the world that I find very disturbing, and feeling like there's this overwhelming horror that surrounds us all the time, and yet we live our lives as if it were not happening. And of course, I suppose we have to, right? We can't individually resolve everything. But that poses an ethical dilemma, and I think also a deep sense of pain. And this piece, I suppose, is a way of acknowledging that problem, that conundrum.
Yeah, and that conundrum is knowing that things are happening and being unable to do anything about these particular things.
Yes. Also about how much horror there is and there has been in the world. Another inspiration for the piece is the Angel of History, which was part of Walter Benjamin's 9 Theses of History. And the Angel of History in this very short piece of writing is described as being caught facing the explosion that is the horror of the world, and its wings being pinned back, so that all the angel can see is the horrors of the world piling, the horrors of history piling at its feet. And that really spoke to me, this as embodying this sense of helplessness that I think many of us experience in the face of being unable to make the change that we would like to see in the world.
Yeah, and I know that you've been creating this piece over quite some time. When did you start?
Oh, there was an original version of the piece that was exhibited at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery back, I think in 2015, if I'm remembering correctly. And that piece originally I had intended to have 3 panels, and it also had a pair of skeletons that were suspended in front of the panels. And I was, because it was a group show and there was a deadline, I was only able to complete 2 of the 3 panels. And the piece never really felt complete. So I picked it up again, a few years ago. I want to say 2018, and began inviting more people to participate. Originally, it wasn't a participatory piece, but as it's developed, it's something that I wanted to integrate the tradition of the sewing bee or the sewing circle into the piece, and to invite other people to take part in it. So at this point, I believe we've sent out about 300 or 400 embroidery kits, and we have had about 150 to 200 back. And those are many of the embroideries that you see behind me.
Yeah, it's really lovely that I know that originally when people made these quilts, it was sort of a community practice. And in our private conversation a long time ago, when I joined one of your sewing circles, you've said that people used to put their initials. And what was the original kind of like point of these quilts?
Well, there were a few different purposes for the quilts. Sometimes they were made by an individual, and that individual could be a child or a young woman who was making a trousseau, or it could be a master embroiderer who was creating it as a way of demonstrating their skill and as a showpiece for their home. But as you say, also, these were frequently community endeavors. And in that case, they were sometimes made as fundraisers. So for a church or for a union or for another organization. In that case, often people would pay to have their names put on the quilt. Or sometimes it would be each person in the community contributing a square. Sometimes community quilts, though, weren't made for fundraisers. Sometimes it would be a person making a quilt where they gather pieces that are made by all of their friends. So there were a lot of different variations of the way that these quilts might be produced. But very frequently, we do find that they are signed pieces, and very often they're dated as well.
So I will ask you about your knowledge of history of textiles a little bit later. Before that, I wanna, but that's what's in my head right now. Before that, I wanna talk about like what, if anything, what was going on in your life that was impacting the creation of this piece, or like that has impacted. I know like when you say like 2015, that's a bit of a turbulent historical time. 2018 deciding to open it up to other folks. Uh, as artists, part of my mission as a curator is to reveal that artists are human.
Yeah, it's there's been so much going on through the making of this piece. Honestly, it certainly has been impacted by things that are happening around me. So, for example, one of the starting points for the quilt was the Truth and Reconciliation document that I was reading, that I read back around the time that I did the original version of the piece, and thinking about, how do we come to terms with our own country's history? But on a more personal level, I think making textiles, we it follows us through our daily lives, because this is the kind of piece where I often am working on it around my home. I don't necessarily, it's not like going in when I'm doing woodworking or something where I'm working in a much more formal studio space. But often this is made in a very domestic space. So it does, when you ask about, what was happening at various times in my life when I was making it, it does make me think about times in my life that have been more difficult than others, and how making art interweaves with that part of our lives. So for me, part of that is always that I do have depression, which is generally very well managed, but at certain times during the production of this piece did flare up. So I look at the piece and I think about, I suppose, the way that I feel about these histories and the relation that it has to the way I feel about the world, and how hopeful or unhopeful I feel about the world at different times in my life.
You were mentioning one of the things that you were mentioning is like being impacted by being impacted by depression. Is there anything else that you can recall about the history of this piece for you?
I think one of the things that I really am enjoying about this piece is the fact that a lot of people I know have contributed to it. So you of course have contributed a little square, and so have many other people who I know well. But the piece has also introduced me to a lot of other people who have contributed, and that's been very interesting for me. Also finding out things about people's history that I didn't know. People who have told me parts of their personal stories. We have created a website for the piece, and many people write about what the reason that they've chosen a certain image. And often those are very interesting to read. With the exhibition, I'm actually, we're going to have this available, which is a short comic that talks about the piece being created, about the ideas behind it. And one of the sections are some of the stories that people have told in relation to the piece. Now, it's not mandatory for people to tell a story, but the stories that have come out of this are really wonderful, in the sense that they reveal the way that different people have dealt with traumas in their lives, and the way that people see the world, that maybe replicates for the community who are seeing the piece and reading the stories on the website. Maybe it replicates a little bit of what an embroidery circle is like, where people are sitting for long periods of time and talking to one another. And I think the embroidery circle is a unique and intimate kind of space for exchange. Traditionally, I suppose we think of the embroidery circle as being a female circle, but of course, this piece is open to anyone. And so we have had people of all different ages and genders, and everyone is welcome to participate.
So this is probably going to be a long story in terms of like you've done other textile pieces too. So like, how did you come to work with textiles, and what do you like about working with textiles?
That's such a great question. Honestly, it goes back to being in art school. When I was at OCAD in the 1980s, I gravitated towards making things out of fabric, even from my first year of study. And I have worked in a wide range of media. My focus as a student wasn't textiles. I was part of an interdisciplinary program, but somehow textiles is the medium that has been continuous throughout my career. I think maybe part of the reason is I really genuinely enjoy handwork, and I really like the meditative aspect of making things by hand. And I'm more inclined to use soft materials than hard materials as an artist. I have done recently a piece in wood, but that's a bit of an anomaly for me. Even if I'm not working in textiles, I tend to gravitate towards things like wax or clay or things that I can manipulate by hand.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Uh, and like I'm also curious about like uh what were what were you like before art school? Like how did it's like it seems like, oh, I started doing art when I was in art school, and then like what is there any textile inspiration from like way back, way before you entered art as a field?
Absolutely. I mean, I really have done textile work my whole life. Um, from learning to embroider as a child through making handmade garments when I was in high school. But I think it wasn't until art school that I really realized that it could be that textiles could be an art form as opposed to a craft. And today, of course, we really think about those definitions much more critically, because craft historically was a way of putting what women do into a different category. And I think about craft and art very differently today than I did when I was a young person or a teenager.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. It was lovely to have this virtual studio visit with you. If there's anything that I forgot to ask or anything that you want to add about the piece or like how you're feeling about the show, please share.
Okay, just one thing, which is I invite everyone who would like to participate in Redwork, the Emperor of Atlantis, to contribute to the piece. If you pick up this brochure at the show, and I'm sure we'll also have other ways for you to get the information. The final page gives the website address, which is www.emperofatlantis. And anybody can go to the website and request an embroidery kit. It is completely free for you to participate, and we just send the kit out to you, and then your work becomes part of this larger community embroidery. And also the work is going to be shown in the fall at the Niagara Artists Center. And it will have evolved, I think, significantly by then from the stage you're seeing at it. You in this show are seeing it at, because I'll be spending the summer working on the piece. It will also continue to evolve afterwards, though. This is a piece with no fixed endpoint. So even during the process of it being exhibited, it will probably continue to be ongoing, possibly for the rest of my natural life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is a beautiful way to conclude our official part of the studio visit.
Thank you.